She was standing at the window when he came home that night. 38 floors above Boston, the city spread out below her like something that had never belonged to her and never would. The rain moved against the glass in slow diagonal lines. The harbor lights blurred and trembled. She was wearing his last name, in a dress that finally fit the shape of her body, and she was thinking about a dead man who had loved her more than she ever knew. A year ago, she had never heard the name Dominic Vero. A year ago, she had been eating lunch alone in the break room of the Harbor Regency Hotel, reading a library book with a cracked spine, timing her 30 minutes with the precision of someone who had learned that clocks do not wait for people like her. Now she was here. She heard his footsteps behind her. She did not turn around. She said, "You don't have to do this." He said nothing. She told him she understood, that whatever promise a dying man had asked him to keep, she was releasing him from it, that she was not the kind of woman men like him stayed for. She had the words ready. She had practiced them in the mirror that morning in the elevator, on the way up in the silence between heartbeats. She turned to face him. Dominic Vero stood near the bar cart with his jacket unbuttoned and his jaw set in that particular line she had come to recognize as his version of listening. The city glowed behind him through floor-to-ceiling glass. He was 36 years old, and he had been built by a life that did not give things freely, and he was looking at her with an expression she could not yet read. She pressed her palms flat against the sides of her thighs to keep her hands from shaking. He took one step forward, and what he said next changed both of their lives forever. But that is the end of the story. This is the beginning. Marcus Calloway died on a Tuesday in October at Massachusetts General Hospital in a private room on the 4th floor that smelled like antiseptic and the long silence that accumulates in places where too many people have said goodbye. He was 34 years old. Pancreatic cancer. The diagnosis had come 8 months before the funeral. By the time the doctors stopped trying, Marcus had already known for weeks. He could feel it the way sailors feel a storm not in the sky, but in the bones and the quiet that precedes the catastrophic. Dominic Vero was the last person to see him alive. They had known each other since they were 17. Two boys from South Boston who had nothing in common except a shared understanding that the world did not give things to people like them. You had to take, you had to hold, you had to be willing to bleed for what you wanted to keep. Dominic had risen through discipline and a mind that was always 3 moves ahead. Marcus had risen through something rarer and more valuable: absolute loyalty, the kind that could not be purchased or broken or reasoned away. When Dominic was 23, a deal had gone wrong in a warehouse off the waterfront. 2 men from a rival organization had cornered him. One held a gun, the other held a length of chain. Dominic would have died that night if Marcus Calloway had not come through a side door with a crowbar and the willingness to take a bullet. Marcus took the bullet. Dominic took a scar across his ribs. From that night forward, there was nothing Dominic Vero would not do for Marcus Calloway. Nothing. So when Marcus lay in that hospital bed with tubes running through him like roots trying to hold him to the earth, and he turned to look at Dominic with glassy, morphine-heavy eyes, and he said the one thing Dominic did not expect him to say, Dominic listened. "I need you to look after Serena." Dominic frowned. "Who?" "My cousin. My mother's sister's daughter." Marcus coughed, the wet, rattling kind that came from somewhere deep and wrong. "She's alone, Dom. She's been alone her entire life. Her family, her Aunt Gloria, the cousins, they don't see her. They never did." Dominic leaned forward in the chair beside the bed. He had been sitting there for 4 hours. His phone had buzzed 41 times. He had not looked at it once. "What do you need me to do?" he asked. Marcus's hand found Dominic's wrist. His grip was weak. It had once been iron. "She's got no one. When I'm gone, she's got nobody. Gloria treats her like a stain on the family name. The cousins are worse." He swallowed. "She's good, Dom. She's the only genuinely good person in that whole family. The only one who visited me here. The only one who sat in this room and didn't look at me like I was already a corpse." Dominic said nothing. He waited. "Marry her." The 2 words landed like a brick through a window. Marry her. Not because you love her. I'm not asking you to love her. I'm asking you to protect her. Give her your name. Give her your roof. Make sure no one ever steps on her again. Marcus's eyes were wet. "She deserves someone who won't let the world keep using her as a doormat. You're the only person I trust to do that." Dominic sat very still. He thought about the empire he ran, the enemies he had collected over 15 years. the life he lived in the spaces between luxury and violence. He thought about bringing a civilian woman into that life, a woman he had never met whose only connection to his world was a cousin who was 20 hours from leaving it. Then he looked at Marcus Calloway, the man who had taken a bullet for him in a waterfront warehouse at 23 years old, and he said the only thing he could say, "I'll take care of her." Marcus closed his eyes. "Promise me." "I promise." Marcus Calloway died 14 hours later. Dominic was not in the room when it happened. He was standing in the hallway staring at his phone reading the name Serena Calloway for the first time in a text message Marcus had sent him 3 days earlier. A name, an address in Quincy, and a single line beneath it. She never knew. "Don't tell her until she's ready." The funeral was held at St. Brendan's Church in Dorchester, a stone building that smelled like old wood and candle wax, and the grief that clings to places where too many people have stood and asked God why. Dominic arrived early and stood in the back row. He positioned himself near the exit, his back to the wall, his eyes moving across the room the way they always did in unfamiliar spaces. Exits, faces, hands, the professional reflex of a man who had survived long enough to make it a habit. The church was half full. Marcus's mother sat in the front pew, small and diminished, holding a tissue like it was the only solid thing left in the world. Beside her sat a woman Dominic assessed immediately as the Aunt Gloria Ashton, 62, dressed in expensive black, her posture rigid with the composure of someone performing grief rather than living it. Beside Gloria sat a younger woman, early 30s, highlights in her hair, the calculated prettiness of someone who spent significant effort on the project of being noticed. The cousin, Cassidy. They occupied the front 2 rows like a photograph meant to prove they cared. And then Dominic saw her. Serena Calloway sat at the end of the third pew, not beside the family, not included in the cluster of relatives who had arranged themselves at the front like they were afraid the cameras, which did not exist, would miss them. She sat apart. Her hands were folded in her lap. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple twist. Her black dress was clean and pressed, but not expensive. Her shoes were practical. Her only jewelry was a thin silver chain at her throat. She was a full-figured woman with brown skin and soft features and a quiet presence that most people walk past without registering. She did not look like anyone Dominic had known in his world. Not the sharp, polished women who orbited his operations. Not the wives of his associates who wore their husbands' money like armor. Serena Calloway looked like someone who had spent a very long time learning how to take up as little space as possible. Dominic watched her for the remainder of the service. He watched the way she pressed her lips together when Marcus's name was spoken, the way her fingers tightened around each other when the priest talked about God's plan as if she disagreed but had no one to tell, the way she never once looked toward the family members who had placed her at the end of the pew like an afterthought. And then he watched the moment, the single precise moment, when Gloria leaned over and whispered something to Cassidy, and both of them glanced back at Serena. And Serena saw it, and something in her face shut down like a light behind a curtain. Clean and practiced, the reflex of a woman who had been absorbing this particular blow for 20 years. After the service, people filed out slowly. Dominic waited. He watched Serena emerge last from the church. She stood on the steps alone, in the gray October light, blinking, holding a small purse against her stomach, like a shield. No one stopped to speak with her. No one pulled her into an embrace. No one said Marcus loved you. He talked about you constantly. She stood there for nearly a full minute, surrounded by people who shared her blood. Then she turned and began walking toward the bus stop at the corner. Dominic pushed off the wall and followed. He caught up with her halfway down the block. When she heard his footsteps, she turned quickly, startled, cautious, her eyes moving over him with the automatic threat assessment that every woman learns before she learns algebra. Serena Calloway. She looked at him with polite distance. "Yes. My name is Dominic Vero. I was a friend of Marcus's." The change in her face was immediate. The caution softened. Her eyes warmed in a way that did something unexpected to the space behind his ribs. "You're Dominic," she said. Not a question. He talked about you. He talked about you, too." Something flickered across her face, surprise, perhaps, or the ghost of a smile that did not quite survive the day. "He shouldn't have," she said quietly. "There's not much to talk about." Dominic studied her. He was not a man who made quick judgments about people. He had survived too long in a world where first impressions got men killed. But standing on a cracked sidewalk in Dorchester, watching this woman speak about herself, As though she were a footnote in someone else's story, he felt something shift. Not attraction, not yet. Something closer to recognition. He held out the envelope. She took it without understanding what it was. She opened it there on the sidewalk in the gray October light and looked at what was inside. 5 years of rent receipts. Her apartment in Quincy, her previous address in Somerville. Before that, the small place in Jamaica Plain, before that. Every payment in order, with Marcus's handwriting on the cover sheet. She never knew. Don't tell her until she's ready. Serena stared at the papers for a long time. Then she looked up at Dominic, and what crossed her face was not simple gratitude and not simple grief. It was the expression of a person who has just learned that they were loved more completely than they understood, and that the person who loved them most is gone, and that those two facts must now be held simultaneously, one in each hand, for the rest of their life. She pressed her lips together hard. She looked back down at the receipts. He never said anything, she said. No. 5 years. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I thought I was managing on my own. You were, Dominic said. He just made sure the floor held. She stood there on the sidewalk with the papers in her hands and the October wind moving around her and the sound of the city continuing its indifferent business in every direction. And she cried briefly, the way people cry when the grief has been waiting for something specific to unlock it, a single quiet cry that she cut off after 10 seconds and absorbed back into herself with the practiced efficiency of a woman who had learned not to take too long with these things in public. Then she folded the receipts and put them back in the envelope. Can I give you a ride somewhere? Dominic asked. She hesitated. He could see her weighing it, the discomfort of accepting help from a stranger, the exhaustion of a day spent grieving alone in a room full of people who did not care. You don't have to do that, she said. Dominic almost smiled. Almost. Marcus told me you'd say that. She looked at him for a longer moment. Then she nodded just once and followed him to the black sedan idling at the curb. He drove her home himself, no driver, no men from his organization in the back seat. Just Dominic behind the wheel, his hands at 10 and 2, the city sliding past the tinted windows in shades of gray and amber. She lived in a small apartment in Quincy, second floor of a triple-decker that had seen better decades. The paint was peeling. The front gate leaned at an angle that suggested surrender. But the windows on the second floor were clean, and there was a small plant on the sill that someone had taken the trouble to care for. Dominic pulled to the curb and put the car in park. Serena sat with her hands in her lap, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Thank you, she said finally, for the ride and for being there today. Marcus would have been glad. He would have been angry, Dominic said, at how they treated you in there. Serena went very still. She did not ask what he meant. She did not pretend she didn't know. And that told Dominic everything he needed to know about how long it had been happening. It's fine, she said. The two most dishonest words in the English language, delivered with the ease of someone who had been saying them for her entire life. Dominic turned in his seat to look at her fully. I need to talk to you about something. Not today, you've had enough today, but soon. Her brow furrowed. About what? About a promise I made to Marcus. He watched confusion cross her face, followed immediately by something that looked almost like fear. The automatic flinch of a woman who had learned that promises made on her behalf usually came with conditions she could not meet. Okay, she said carefully. I'll call you this week. She nodded. She opened the door. She paused. Dominic. Yeah, whatever Marcus asked you to do. She looked at him with that steady brown-eyed gaze. You don't have to do it. He always worried too much about me. Dominic looked at her. The streetlight behind her turned the edges of her hair amber. She was holding the car door like she was ready to run, and she was giving him permission to disappear, offering it with such gentle, practiced resignation that it landed somewhere beneath his ribs. She had been releasing people from obligations to her for so long that she had made it effortless because she had never believed she was worth the keeping. Good night, Serena. She closed the door and walked up the steps to her building. Dominic sat in the car for a long time after her window light came on. He sat there looking at the peeling paint and the leaning gate and the small plant on the sill, thinking about the two words you don't have to, and what it meant that she had learned to say them so easily. 3 days later, Dominic called. Serena answered on the fourth ring. From the slight breathlessness in her voice, he understood she had been debating since the first. Can we meet? He asked. No preamble. No small talk. When tonight there's a restaurant in Back Bay, I'll send a car. A pause. I can take the tea. I'll send a car. Silence, then okay. But between the phone call and the dinner, there were 4 days that Serena never told him about. 4 days of sitting at the small desk in her Quincy apartment with her laptop open, a cup of coffee going cold beside her, reading everything she could find about Dominic Vero. She found the business filings, the private holding companies in Delaware and Nevada, the nightclubs, the commercial real estate, the membership club on Newberry Street that appeared in 3 different magazine profiles and 0 public ownership records. She found the court cases, 2 federal, 1 state, all dismissed or declined. She found the photographs from charity galas and city hall fundraisers, Dominic in dark suits beside mayors and state senators and city councilors who publicly praised his contributions to waterfront development. She found the other photographs, the ones that did not appear in press releases, the ones that confirmed what Marcus had hinted at over the years without ever saying directly. She understood what Dominic Vero was. She understood the world he moved through, the rules that governed it, the brand of danger that clung to men who operated in the space between the legal and the unspoken. She sat with that understanding for 4 days. She thought about her Aunt Gloria, who had taken her in at 9 years old after her mother died and had made her feel the charity of it every single day for the next decade. She thought about the jobs she had worked since she was 16. She thought about Marcus paying her rent for 5 years without a word. She thought about the plant on her windowsill that she had kept alive through 2 winters and 3 apartment moves, because it was the one living thing in her space that depended on her continuing to show up. She thought about what it would mean to say yes. On the 4th day, she called him. "I'll do it," she said. The silence on his end lasted exactly long enough to mean something. "Good," he said. "I'll pick you up Saturday." She hung up. She sat on the edge of her bed and looked at her hands and thought about what she had just agreed to. She was not naive. She was not desperate. She was a 32-year-old woman who had read the full picture and made a clear-eyed calculation, and for the first time in her life, she had chosen deliberately, not out of necessity, not because there was no other option, but because she believed him. She believed Dominic Vero would do exactly what he said he would do. The restaurant was called Marrow. It occupied the ground floor of a converted brownstone in Back Bay, the kind of establishment where the menu had no prices and the lighting made everyone look like they belonged. Dominic owned it through 3 layers of incorporation, but the staff knew, and the hostess who led Serena to a private table in the back knew, and the way the room arranged itself around his presence when he stood to greet her made the ownership clear without a word spoken. Serena arrived in a navy blouse and dark slacks, her hair down, her face composed. She sat across from him and looked at him the way she looked at most things, carefully taking inventory, giving nothing away for free. Dominic waited until the food had been ordered. Then he said simply, "You know what I do?" "Yes." "And you're still here." "I'm still here." He studied her across the candlelight. "Marcus asked me to marry you, to give you my name and my protection. 1 year at the end of which, if you want to walk away, you walk away, financially taken care of, permanently. But for 12 months, no one touches you. No one diminishes you. No one treats you the way your family has treated you your entire life." The silence that followed was the loudest thing Serena had ever sat inside. She stared at him. Then she said, "You could write me a check. You could set up a trust. You don't have to marry me to keep a promise." "Marcus didn't ask me to write you a check," Dominic said quietly. "He asked me to make sure no one ever makes you feel invisible again. Those are different things." Serena's hands tightened in her lap. "Look at me," she said, and her voice fractured slightly at the edges. "I work a hotel front desk. I live in a walk-up in Quincy. I'm not the kind of woman men like you—" "When was the last time anyone chose you first?" he asked. The question was quiet. It was not unkind. It landed in the exact center of everything she had been carrying for 32 years. She did not answer. He waited. She looked down at the tablecloth and pressed one finger against the white linen and did not speak for a long time. Then she looked up. "Can I think about it?" "Take whatever time you need." The wedding was held on a Saturday morning at the office of a district court judge in downtown Boston. Dominic wore a dark suit. Serena wore a cream-colored dress she had found at a consignment shop in Cambridge, simple with clean lines, the kind of dress that whispered instead of announced. She had debated for hours. In the end, she had chosen the dress that made her feel like herself rather than the dress that tried to make her look like someone else. Constance Hale served as one witness. She was 54 years old, steel-haired, and unreadable, and had worked for Dominic for 8 years. She had watched him conduct negotiations that made federal prosecutors nervous. She had never once seen him move with anything other than complete cold precision. She watched him turn when Serena entered the judge's chambers. She watched something cross his face, something quick and private, like a door opening and immediately shutting again, and she filed it away in the part of her mind where she kept the things that mattered. The ceremony lasted 11 minutes. Dominic said, "I do," with the quiet certainty of a man who had weighed the words before allowing them out. Serena said, "I do," with a voice that was steady, even though her hands were not, and Constance noticed both things. When the judge said, "You may kiss the bride," there was a moment of complete stillness. Dominic turned to face Serena. The distance between them was small but felt immense. He looked at her for 2 full seconds, looked at her the way he looked at things he was trying to understand, and then he leaned forward and pressed his lips to her forehead. Not her mouth, her forehead. Serena's eyes closed involuntarily. It lasted 2 seconds, maybe 3. Then Dominic straightened and offered her his arm, and they walked out of the judge's chambers as husband and wife. Constance Hale, standing 3 feet to the left, made a note of the things she had observed. In 8 years, through every negotiation and confrontation and difficult moment she had witnessed, she had never seen his hands tremble. They were trembling now. Dominic's penthouse occupied the top 2 floors of a glass and steel building in the Seaport District. The elevator opened directly into a living space that was vast and minimal, designed by someone who valued silence over warmth. Dark hardwood floors, floor-to-ceiling windows, furniture chosen for restraint. Serena stepped out with 2 suitcases. She stood in the entryway and looked at the view. The harbor on one side, the city on the other. Boston spread wide and indifferent below them. Then she looked down at her shoes. Practical flats that had walked 4 miles of Quincy sidewalk in the last week alone. She did not apologize for them. That was new. "Your room is this way," Dominic said. He led her down a hallway to a door at the far end. He opened it. The room was beautiful queen bed and white linens, a window that looked over the harbor, a closet empty and waiting, and a bathroom with marble tile and thick towels that had never been used. Serena set her suitcases down and looked around and felt 2 things simultaneously, a gratitude so large it was almost painful, and a loneliness so precise it had a shape. "This is beautiful," she said. "Thank you." He stood in the doorway, one hand on the frame. "There's food in the kitchen. Constance stocked everything. If you need anything else, tell me." He started to turn away. "Dominic," he stopped. "I know this is strange. I want you to know I'll keep my space. I won't be a burden." He looked at her from the doorway. It was not anger on his face. It was not pity. It was something harder and quieter. Something that lived in the territory between frustration and sorrow. "You're not a burden, Serena," he said. "Don't say that again." He turned and walked down the hallway. Serena stood in the middle of her beautiful room and pressed her hand against her mouth and did not cry, because she had stopped crying about these things a long time ago, and she was not going to start again, just because a man with pale gray eyes had said she was not a burden, as if he simply meant it. She unpacked her 2 suitcases methodically. She made the bed with hospital corners tight and exact, the way she had made every bed in every apartment for 15 years. She put her books on the windowsill beside the lamp. She placed the one photograph she had brought, Marcus young and grinning, taken years before the diagnosis, on the small table beside the bed. She stood at the window for a long time. What she did not know, standing there that first night, was that Dominic was on the other side of the building doing the same thing, standing at his own window, looking at the same harbor lights, holding in his hand a small folded piece of paper that had been tucked beneath the rent receipts in the envelope. A note in Marcus Calloway's handwriting that said, "She thinks no one ever chose her first. Be the first one, Dom, just be the first." Dominic folded the paper along its original creases and placed it in the inner pocket of his jacket, against his chest, against the scar along his ribs, where the warehouse bullet had not quite reached. He had made a promise. He intended to keep it. The first week was quiet in the way that unfamiliar arrangements are quiet, not peaceful, but held. They moved around each other like 2 people who had been placed in the same space by circumstances neither had fully chosen, and were now engaged in the careful, unspoken negotiation of how much room each was allowed to occupy. Dominic left before 7 each morning and returned after 10 each night. The penthouse was large enough that their schedules rarely intersected, and when they did, the encounters were brief and functional. A nod in the kitchen, a word about logistics, the polite distance of two strangers who happened to share an address. Serena continued working her shifts at the Harbor Regency. She caught the water taxi from the seaport to the hotel each morning, made the return trip each evening, moved through her days with the same quiet efficiency she had used to survive every year before this one. Her colleagues did not know she had gotten married. She had not told them. She was still working out what category this fell into. She washed her dishes by hand even though the penthouse had a dishwasher. She made the bed with hospital corners every single day. She moved through the shared spaces along the edges, quietly taking up as little surface area as possible. What she did not know was that Dominic noticed every single thing. He noticed the hand-washed dishes in the hospital corners. He noticed the way she moved through the apartment like someone not entirely sure she was allowed to be there. He noticed the books she carried, thick literary novels with cracked spines, read and reread, carried in bags for years. He noticed the way she held her coffee mug with both hands wrapped around it, as if it were giving her something beyond warmth. He noticed because he had built an empire on his ability to observe on reading people before they read him. But observing Serena Calloway was different from anything he had done before. It was not strategic. It was not defensive. It was the slow, involuntary attention of a man who was beginning to find something he had not anticipated. The shift happened in the second week on a Tuesday night. Dominic came home late past midnight, his knuckles raw beneath his gloves, his jaw carrying the tension that followed negotiations requiring more than words. He walked into the kitchen, expecting darkness. Serena was sitting at the island. She had a cup of tea and a book and reading glasses he had not seen her wear before, small, in wire-framed and slightly crooked, the kind owned for a long time and never replaced. She was wearing an oversized gray sweater, and her hair was down, and she looked entirely at home in a way that stopped him in the doorway. She looked up. Her eyes moved to his hands, quick, and practiced the reflexive assessment of a woman who had learned to read a room through the body language of the people in it. She registered his knuckles. She did not ask what happened. She set her book face down on the counter. She stood and went to the cabinet and took down a second mug. She poured hot water from the kettle she had kept warm and placed it in front of him with a tea bag already steeping. Then she sat back down and picked up her book. Dominic stood at the island looking at the mug. Something in his chest did something it had not done in a considerable stretch of years. It loosened. He sat down across from her. He wrapped his bruised hands around the mug and drank the tea in silence while she read. Neither spoke. The city hummed below. The harbor lights moved on the water. The kitchen was warm. It was the most peaceful 20 minutes he had experienced in recent memory. After that, it became a pattern. He would come home late. She would be there, not waiting, not performing availability, just present, reading or working on a crossword, the lamp throwing a circle of yellow light across the island. Some nights she listened to something through her earbuds with her eyes closed and her head tilted slightly, her lips moving almost imperceptibly with the words of whatever she was hearing. He always came home to something warm. He never had to ask for it. And Dominic, who had spent his entire adult life surrounded by people who wanted something from him, money, access, protection, proximity to power, found himself coming home earlier and earlier, not because anything required it, but because the penthouse felt different when she was in it. It felt inhabited. It felt for the first time in the 4 years he had owned it, like somewhere a person actually lived. Gloria Ashton arrived on a Wednesday afternoon in the building's lobby without warning or invitation. Dominic was at the Alcott, the private members club on Newbury Street that served as the legitimate face of his operations, when the security alert came through on his phone. He pulled up the camera feed on his laptop and saw her immediately. She was standing at the concierge desk in an expensive black coat, rigid-postured and sharp-featured, radiating the entitlement of someone who had never been told no by anyone whose opinion she valued. Beside her stood Cassidy, highlighted hair, calculating eyes, the narrowed expression of a woman taking inventory. Dominic called Serena. "Your aunt is in the lobby." A brief silence. "I see her on the screen. The concierge just called up. Do you want me to come home?" Another silence. Longer. "No, I can handle it." "Are you sure? I've been handling her my whole life, Dominic." He heard something in her voice he had not heard before. Not strength exactly. She had always had strength. It was simply the kind that had been turned inward too long, used for endurance rather than resistance. This was different. This was something sharpening at its edge. "You don't have to let her in," he said. A pause, then very quietly, "I know." She let her in anyway. Dominic stayed on the security feed. He knew he was watching something private. But the expression on Gloria's face as she stepped out of the elevator, that combination of acquisitive curiosity and cold appraisal, triggered something in him that went beyond protectiveness. He watched Gloria walk into the penthouse the way a real estate assessor walks into a property. Room by room, surface by surface, calculating the value of everything she saw. Cassidy followed behind her eyes, moving across the harbor view with the naked envy of someone who had always assumed she would be the one in rooms like this. Serena stood by the kitchen island in jeans and a soft gray sweater, her arms crossed, her face carefully composed. "Well," Gloria said, looking around slowly, "this is quite the upgrade from Quincy." "Hello, Aunt Gloria." "Cassidy." Gloria turned to face her. The look she gave Serena was the kind that leaves marks no one can photograph. No one in the family was invited to the wedding. It was a small ceremony. Small. Gloria's mouth thinned. "Serena, what exactly have you gotten yourself into? I've heard things about this man, about his businesses." She waved her hand vaguely as if criminality were a smell she was trying to clear from the air. Serena said nothing. Cassidy had drifted toward the living room windows. "This view is insane," she murmured almost to herself. Then she turned, and the look she gave Serena was a blade wrapped in a smile. "I mean, no offense, but how did this even happen? How does someone like you end up—" She gestured at the penthouse, at the view, at the life. "With someone like him, someone like you." Serena had heard those words in 100 configurations across 32 years. Someone like you doesn't get invited. Someone like you should be grateful. Someone like you shouldn't expect too much. She looked at Cassidy, then she looked at Gloria. "Marcus introduced us," she said simply. Gloria's face shifted. The mention of Marcus, her nephew, whom she had not visited once during 8 months of illness, produced a flicker of something that might have been guilt in a different woman, but in Gloria was merely inconvenience. "Of course," Gloria said. "Even from the grave, that boy finds a way to complicate things." Something happened in Serena's body then. Not rage, something colder. The feeling of a door closing quietly and finally on something that had been left open for too long. "Is there something you need, Aunt Gloria?" Serena asked. Her voice was entirely level. Gloria straightened. She adjusted her coat. She looked at Serena with the expression she had always used, the one that communicated without words, that Serena was an equation that would never properly balance. "I need to know you're not going to embarrass this family," Gloria said. "I need to know you understand what you are and what you're not, and that you're not going to overreach yourself in ways that reflect badly on the rest of us." The silence that followed changed the furniture of the room. Serena unfolded her arms. She placed her hands flat on the kitchen island. She looked at her aunt and spoke in a voice so calm it was more unsettling than any raised voice could have been. "You didn't come to Marcus's funeral," she said. "You sat in the front row and whispered about me while I sat alone in the third pew. You took me in when I was 9 years old, and you made me feel the charity of it every single day until I left your house at 18. And you have walked into my home today without an invitation to tell me to remember my place." She paused. "I remember it perfectly, Aunt Gloria. I just don't live there anymore." Dominic, watching from his office, leaned back in his chair. He had suspected she had this in her. He had seen the outline of it in the way she carried herself in small moments, the slight lift of her chin when someone spoke to her dismissively, the precision with which she chose her words. But watching her say these things, watching her hold the room with nothing but the quiet authority of a woman who had decided she was finished being diminished, this was the woman Marcus had seen, the one he had been trying to protect all along. Dominic understood something in that moment he had not fully understood before. Marcus had not asked him to carry Serena. He had asked him to give her somewhere safe enough to stand. Gloria gathered herself with the offended dignity of someone confronted with their own cruelty and choosing to interpret it as disrespect. She adjusted her collar. She looked at Serena one last time with the cold assessment of a woman making a prediction. "We'll see how long this lasts," she said. "Men like that don't stay with women like you. Not once the novelty wears off." She walked to the elevator. Cassidy followed, casting one final hungry glance at the harbor view before the doors closed. Serena stood in the kitchen for a long time after they left. Her hands were trembling. Her jaw was locked. She breathed through her nose in the slow, deliberate rhythm of someone trying very hard not to come apart. Dominic's phone buzzed. A text from Constance Hale, who had reviewed the feed from her own office. "Your wife handled that well." Dominic typed back, "I know." He came home early that evening. He said nothing about what he had seen. He simply hung his jacket, rolled his sleeves, and began pulling things from the refrigerator. Chicken, vegetables, olive oil. He moved through the kitchen with the quiet competence of a man who had learned to cook in a childhood where no one was going to do it for him. Serena was on the couch wrapped in a blanket, the television on, at low volume, her eyes focused on nothing. She turned her head. "You cook." "Don't sound surprised." She watched him from the couch. The sound of the knife against the cutting board, steady and rhythmic, was unexpectedly soothing. The sound of someone making something in a space that was also hers. "I saw the security footage," Dominic said without looking up. "From this afternoon." Serena went still. "I'm sorry, I should have." "Don't apologize." He looked at her. "You stood your ground. That's nothing to apologize for." She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. After a moment, she said, "She's always been like that, since I was a child." She paused. "My mother died when I was 9. My father couldn't hold it together afterward. He was just gone one way and then another. Gloria took me in, but she never let me forget what it cost her." She looked at her hands. "Marcus was the only one who treated me like I actually belonged in the family." Dominic said nothing. He kept chopping. The knife moved in precise, even strokes. "He used to call me every Sunday," Serena continued, her voice steadying itself around the sentence. "No matter what, even when he was sick, even toward the end." She paused. "He called me the day before he died and told me he had taken care of everything. I didn't know what he meant." "Now you do," Dominic said. She looked at him across the kitchen. "He loved you," she said. "He told me that." Not in those words. Marcus would never say something that plainly, but he told me once that Dominic Vero was the only person he trusted completely. She looked down. "That's what love sounds like when men like Marcus say it." Dominic's hands paused on the cutting board, just for a moment. Then they resumed. "Dinner will be ready in 20 minutes, he said. They ate at the island. Serena did not eat carefully, not the measured way she had eaten the first week. She ate the way you eat when someone has cooked for you with their own hands, and the food is warm, and the apartment is quiet, and you are beginning to understand that you are not a guest in this place. 3 weeks into the marriage, Raymond Voss confirmed what his men had been telling him for 10 days. Dominic Vero had a wife. Voss ran the southern waterfront operations in Boston, the docks, the container routes, the supply lines that moved through the port on schedules that had nothing to do with official manifests. He had been attempting to expand north for 3 years. Dominic had blocked every move, not through direct confrontation, but through positioning, through leverage, through the quiet accumulation of debts owed by people in useful places. The two men had never met in person. They communicated through intermediaries and through the language of territory. Voss was 52 years old. He had been in this business long enough to know that every man had one thing he could not protect with strategy alone. He had been waiting for Dominic's thing. He had found it. He did not move immediately. He sent a man named Aldridge, thin and unremarkable, the kind of face that slid from memory the moment it left your field of vision, to verify the information through observation. Aldridge confirmed. The woman worked at the Harbor Regency Hotel. She took the water taxi 4 days a week. She had no visible security, no protection assigned to her, no awareness of the surveillance that had been on her for 11 days. Voss filed the information and waited for the right moment. He did not understand, not yet, that the woman he had assessed as a liability was in the process of becoming something else entirely. The morning Aldridge walked into the Harbor Regency and approached the front desk, Serena did not know who he was. She knew something was wrong. It was an instinct developed across years of working a front desk, the alertness that comes from processing hundreds of human interactions and learning through accumulation to recognize the ones that do not add up. Aldridge was polite, his story was coherent, his documentation appeared in order. But he knew her name before she offered it. He knew the name of her shift manager. He mentioned Marcus Calloway offhandedly, as if it were public knowledge, as the person who had referred him. Marcus had been dead for 3 months. Serena excused herself to consult the booking system. She went to the back office. She called Dominic's cell phone. He answered on the second ring. "There's a man at my desk," she said quietly. "He knows things he shouldn't know." He mentioned Marcus. The silence on his end lasted 2 seconds. "Describe him." She described Aldridge. Dominic listened without interrupting. "Go back to the desk," he said. "Be professional. Don't let him know you called. I'll be there in 8 minutes. Dominic, 8 minutes. Don't leave the lobby." She went back to the desk. She was professional. She asked Aldridge about his reservation requirements with the calm, focused attention she brought to every guest interaction. She gave nothing away. He was there in 7. She saw him come through the revolving door in his black overcoat, rain on his shoulders, and she watched the quality of the lobby change in the way it always changed when Dominic Vero entered a space, that subtle, unconscious reorganization of attention that precedes a significant shift in the atmosphere of a room. Aldridge saw him too. And Aldridge, who had been in this business long enough to recognize what he was looking at, understood immediately that he had miscalculated the timeline. He turned from the desk. Dominic crossed the lobby at the measured pace of a man who has never needed to hurry because the world has learned to wait. He stopped between Aldridge and the exit. He said nothing. He simply looked at Aldridge with those pale gray eyes and let the silence do what words would have cluttered. Aldridge left. Dominic turned to Serena. She was standing behind the desk with her hands flat on the counter and her face composed with the careful neutrality she wore when she was assessing something difficult. She looked at him across the lobby and did not look away. This was the first time she had seen the other version of him. Not the man who came home for tea. Not the man who cooked in rolled shirt sleeves and listened without interruption. The other one, the one the rest of the city arranged itself around. She did not flinch. She did not step back. She said very quietly, "Who was he?" "Someone delivering a message," Dominic said. "What message?" He looked at her for a moment. "That someone has noticed you exist." She absorbed this. "Is that dangerous?" "It could be." She nodded slowly. She picked up her pen from the counter. She set it back down. "Okay," she said. "Not okay, I'll go back to Quincy. Not okay, this is too much. Just okay, the word of a woman taking the measure of something difficult and deciding without drama to stand inside it." Dominic looked at her across the marble counter of the Harbor Regency Hotel lobby and felt something shift in his chest that he recognized distantly as the feeling of a decision being made. Not about strategy, not about protection, about something else entirely. He drove her home that evening. They drove through Back Bay and over the bridge in the kind of silence that had stopped being uncomfortable weeks ago and had become instead something they carried easily, the quiet of two people who had learned that not everything needs filling with words. She said halfway across the harbor, "You came in 7 minutes." "I said 8. It was 7. A pause. "I drove fast." She looked out at the water. "Marcus always said you were the kind of person who showed up." She paused. "I didn't fully understand what he meant until today." Dominic said nothing. She looked at him. "Thank you." He kept his eyes on the road. "Don't thank me. Just don't go anywhere alone until I tell you it's clear." She turned back to the window. "Okay," she said again. That evening, after Dominic confirmed Serena was settled upstairs, he made a call from the underground garage, quiet and brief. A name and an instruction, find out who ran the contact. "I want a name by morning." He had the name by 10 o'clock that night. Leland Caruso. He sat with it for a long time in his office. The city spread out beyond the glass, the name sitting in front of him like a fact he needed to fully absorb before he could decide what it meant. 15 years. Leland had been with him since the beginning of what the organization had become. He had sat beside Dominic through 2 federal investigations, one internal betrayal that had ended badly for the man who committed it, and the careful, difficult transition of their legitimate holdings from 3 businesses to 11. He was 42 years old, and he was the person Dominic had trusted most in the world after Marcus. Dominic thought about the waterfront warehouse at 23. He thought about Marcus taking a bullet in the shoulder. He thought about the arithmetic of loyalty, what it cost, what it bought, how long it lasted, and whether it could survive the moment when the person who owed it decided they knew better than you what you needed. He thought about Serena saying he was the kind of person who showed up. He thought about the woman down the hallway who had looked at the most dangerous version of him across a hotel lobby and said nothing more than okay. He understood that what Leland had done, he had done because he believed it was right. That was the most complicated part. Not treachery for profit, not cowardice dressed up as strategy. A man who had made a genuine calculation about what the organization required and acted on it the way he had always acted, decisively and without hesitation, on behalf of what he believed Dominic needed. Leland was not wrong that Serena was changing him. He was wrong about what that meant. The next morning, Dominic called Leland into his office at the Alcott. He closed the door. He placed the information on the desk between them, the name of the intermediary that dates the communication chain, and waited. Leland looked at it. He did not deny it. He looked up and said, "She's changing you, Dom. And in our world, changed men get people killed." The room was very quiet. Dominic looked at his second-in-command of 15 years and said 4 words. "I know, that's the point." He picked up the documents from the desk. "You're done," he said. "Leave the building. Leave the city for 30 days. After that, we don't speak." Leland stood. He straightened his jacket. He looked at Dominic with the expression of a man who believed he had done the right thing and was paying the price for it. "She's going to cost you everything," Leland said. Dominic said nothing. Leland left. The door closed. Dominic stood in his empty office for a long time. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and took out the folded piece of paper he had been carrying since October. He read the 8 words in Marcus's handwriting one more time. Then he folded it closed and put it back against his chest and went back to work. That evening, he came home to find Serena in the kitchen, making something that smelled of wine and rosemary, her reading glasses on her nose, her sleeves pushed to her elbows, a recipe propped on her phone against the fruit bowl. She looked up when he walked in. She smiled, and it was the unguarded one, the real one, brown and warm, the smile of a woman who was genuinely glad to see the person who had just walked through the door. Dominic felt it in his sternum like a lock turning. "It might be terrible," she said, nodding at the pot. "I've never made it before." "Then we'll find out together," he said. She laughed, short and surprised, as if the sound of her own laughter caught her off guard. He sat down at the island, and she turned back to the stove, and the kitchen filled with the smell of something good being made, and Dominic thought about the 8 words in his jacket pocket and understood for the first time that Marcus had not asked him to do an impossible thing. He had asked him to do the most natural thing in the world. He had just needed the right person to show him what that looked like. They ate at the island. The food was good, better than good. They talked the way they had begun to talk in the evenings, easily, without agenda, following the conversation where it wanted to go, rather than steering it. Serena told him about a book she was rereading, James Baldwin, a writer she had first encountered in a high school library and never fully left behind. He wrote about being visible in a world that organizes itself around your absence, she said. "The first time I read him, I was 16, and I didn't have the language for what I was feeling, but he had it. He gave it to me." Dominic was quiet for a moment. "I read him in prison," he said. Serena looked at him steadily. She did not recoil. She did not perform surprise. She simply looked at him and waited. "I was 20, 18 months for assault. The prison library was the only place nobody bothered you. I read everything." He paused. "Baldwin was the one that changed something. He wrote about surviving in a world that had decided you were expendable. I understood that." "I understand it too," she said. They looked at each other across the kitchen island, and the space between them had changed shape, smaller now, more deliberate, as if the room itself had decided these two people had been cautious long enough. Spring arrived in early March, reluctantly at first, then all at once. One morning, the harbor was gray ice and bare branches. 3 days later, the light changed. Something loosened in the air over the water, and the city remembered what it was capable of when the winter finally released its grip. Serena noticed it on a Tuesday morning, standing at the kitchen window with her coffee, watching the early light move across the harbor. She put down her mug and called the admissions office at Boston University. She had been thinking about it for weeks. She had not told Dominic, not because she was hiding it, but because she was not yet sure enough of the idea to give it to someone else. It was still something she was holding close, turning over in private, the way she had always held things that mattered. The woman at the admissions office was efficient and kind. English literature, spring semester, spaces available. Serena thanked her and hung up. She opened the financial aid portal on her phone and looked at the first page of the application, the one that asked for household income, and felt the familiar weight of the arithmetic settle across her shoulders. She closed the portal. She was still standing at the window when Dominic came into the kitchen. He poured his coffee, turned, and looked at her. He had developed over the months they had shared this space a particular understanding of her stillness, the ability to read what was happening inside it. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. She told him, simply without apology, the admissions call English literature, the plan she had carried since she was 17, and been told by a woman stirring soup without looking up that it was not a plan worth having. Dominic listened without moving. When she finished, he said, "What's stopping you?" "The finances are." "What's stopping you?" he said again. Not a question. She held his gaze. "Nothing," she said after a moment. "Then go tomorrow." "The tuition." "I'll make one call, not to pull a string, to remove a barrier." He set his mug on the counter. "You earn the seat. I make sure the door opens. Those are different things." He looked at her directly. "Marcus paid your rent for 5 years without asking your permission. I'm paying your tuition. It's what people do when they care about someone. They clear the path without taking the walk from you." The kitchen was very quiet. Serena looked at him, at the man who had said what he said in the most matter-of-fact voice, as if it were simply an accurate description of the situation. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. He picked up his jacket. He was almost to the door when she said his name. He stopped. "Thank you," she said. "Not for the money, for treating it like it's real." He looked at her across the kitchen. "It is real," he said. "It's always been real." He left for the office. Serena stood at the window for a long time after the elevator closed. Then she opened the BU admissions portal on her phone, and this time she did not close it. She walked into her first class on a Monday morning in late March, carrying a new backpack and a second-hand copy of Beloved that she had found at the used bookstore on Commonwealth Avenue. She sat in the front row. She did not apologize for being there. The professor wrote 3 words on the board: visibility, memory, survival. "These are the coordinates," she said, "of every text we will read this semester. Not themes, coordinates. The difference matters." Serena wrote the words in her notebook. She underlined them once. Then she looked up at the board and felt something she did not immediately have a name for, something warm and expanding, the feeling of a space opening inside her that had been sealed for a very long time. She was exactly where she was supposed to be. She came home that evening carrying the energy of it carefully, not wanting to spill a drop. She came into the kitchen and started talking before she had fully taken off her coat, telling Dominic about the coordinates on the board, about Toni Morrison and Ralph Ellison, about the professor's voice when she spoke about the politics of who gets to be seen. Dominic set down the contract he was reading. He listened completely. When she finished, something was in his expression that she had not seen before, something she would have called, if she were writing it down, relief, as if he had been waiting for this version of her to arrive. "The professor said visibility is a political act," Serena said. "That choosing to be seen when the world has organized itself around your absence is a form of insistence." She paused. "I've been thinking about that." "What have you been thinking?" "That I spent a long time doing the opposite." She looked at her hands on the counter. "Making myself smaller. Not because I wanted to disappear, but because being visible felt dangerous. Visible people get evaluated, and I was always afraid of what the evaluation would find." Dominic was quiet for a moment. "What does it find?" She looked at him steadily. "I'm still working that out." He nodded. He picked up his contract. Then he set it down again. "For what it's worth," he said, "what I found was someone worth a great deal more than she had been told." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned back to her bag and took out her copy of Beloved and sat down at the island across from him. She reading, he working. The harbor outside the windows, the city below. The silence between them had long since stopped being empty. Gloria called on a Thursday evening in June when Serena was studying at the kitchen island, notes spread around her reading glasses sliding down her nose. She looked at the name on the screen. She looked across the island at Dominic, who was reading a contract. "It's Gloria," she said. He looked up. "You don't have to answer it." "I know." She picked up the phone. "Hello, Aunt Gloria." Dominic set down his contract and did not pretend to keep reading. He listened to Serena's half of the conversation. The measured responses, the level voice of a woman who was neither fighting nor retreating, simply holding her ground. I understand, Aunt Gloria. I hear you. That's your opinion. Then Gloria said something that changed the temperature of the room. Dominic watched Serena's face go flat, watched the color leave her cheeks, watched her hand tighten around the phone until her knuckles changed. The conversation ended shortly after. Serena set the phone on the counter very carefully. What did she say? Dominic asked. Serena looked at the phone, then up. She said Marcus would be ashamed of me, she said, for taking advantage of his friendship, for using his death to trap a man into marriage. She paused. She said I should remember what I am and stop pretending to be something I'm not. The room was completely silent. Dominic sat very still, the total absolute stillness that preceded the most deliberate version of himself. He picked up his phone. He walked to the window and made a call. Serena heard fragments, quiet even fragments. She heard Gloria Ashton. She heard David Ashton. She heard the word contracts. She heard city. She heard Friday. When he came back, she asked, "What did you do?" Gloria's husband runs a construction company, Dominic said. Mid-size, city contracts, schools, municipal buildings, infrastructure work. Those contracts have kept their family comfortable for 20 years. He sat down. As of Friday, those contracts will be under review. The review will find irregularities. The audit that follows will find more. David Ashton's company will lose its preferred contractor status with the city of Boston. Serena stared at him. You can do that, just like that. The question has never been whether I could. It's been whether I should. He looked at her across the island. When someone uses Marcus's name to hurt you, when they take the memory of the person who loved you most and turn it into a weapon, the answer becomes very simple. Serena stood from the island. She walked toward him. She stopped close enough that she had to look up to meet his eyes, and she was trembling, not from fear, but from something that had been building for months and had not yet found its way out. I don't need you to fight my battles, she said. I know. I've been fighting them alone for 30 years. I know that too. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture so quiet and natural and entirely without calculation that it undid something in her chest. But you're not alone anymore, he said, and the people who hurt you need to understand that the cost of doing so has changed. She stood in the kitchen of the penthouse above Boston, looking up at a man who could dismantle a 20-year business with a single phone call, and who was touching her hair with the gentleness of someone handling something they did not want to damage. She rose on her toes and kissed him. It was brief and fierce and honest, the kiss of a woman who had decided to stop being afraid of wanting things pressed against the mouth of a man who had decided to stop pretending he did not want them back. When she pulled back, his eyes were different. The gray had gone dark. His hand had moved from her hair to the back of her neck. He was holding her there, not trapping, not pulling, just holding, as if he needed to feel her pulse beneath his palm to confirm she was real. Again, he said. She kissed him again. This time it lasted longer. Gloria called once more 3 weeks later. Serena was alone in the apartment. She answered. She listened to her aunt's voice for the last time. Call off your husband. I didn't ask him to do anything. And even if I had, he makes his own decisions. This is blackmail. No, Serena said. This is consequence. You spent 30 years treating me and Marcus like problems to be managed. And then you used his name, his memory to try to diminish me one last time. She paused. I'm genuinely sorry about David's company, but you crossed a line, Aunt Gloria. And there are lines that once crossed the geography changes permanently. A silence. Goodbye, Aunt Gloria. She hung up. She set the phone on the counter. She exhaled once slowly. She stood in the kitchen for a long time, looking out at the harbor, feeling the quality of a door that had been standing open for 3 decades, finally quietly closing. When Dominic came home that evening, she was reading at the island glasses on tea beside her. She told him about the call, what she had said. He listened. When she finished, he looked at her for a moment. How do you feel? She thought about it genuinely, not the reflexive find that had carried her through decades, but the actual answer held up to the light and examined honestly. Free, she said. And she smiled, not the careful one, not the composed one she wore for difficult rooms, but the real one, wide and warm and slightly reckless. The smile of a woman who had walked through a door she had been standing outside of for most of her life, and found on the other side that the room was warmer than she had been told it would be. Dominic looked at that smile and something in his face opened briefly and completely, the way a door opens when someone on the other side finally has the right key. The gala was in August at the Four Seasons on Boylston Street. Dominic attended because his name was on the program, and these things required a body in the room. He asked Serena to come. She said yes. A seamstress came to the penthouse 3 days before the event. Serena protested. "You're walking into a room full of people who evaluate everything on site," Dominic said. "I want them to see you the way I see you." "And how is that?" He looked at her steadily. "Clearly," he said, "without all the noise." The dress was dark green, floor-length, simple, with lines that followed the actual shape of her body, not the shape she had spent years apologizing for, not the shape she had learned to minimize through strategic choices of fabric and cut. Her real shape, the one that existed when she stopped trying to disappear. When she walked out of the bedroom on the evening of the gala, Dominic was in the living room, adjusting his cufflinks. He looked up. His hand stopped. She watched his face with the fine-grained attention she had developed over 8 months of sharing a space with him, the ability to read the small, involuntary things his body did when he forgot to control them. His hands were completely still. His eyes moved over her, not appraising, not calculating, but absorbing the way you absorb something you have been looking at for a long time and are only now truly seeing in the right light. "I look," she started, "like the reason I come home," he said. She blinked. The smile came before she could stop it. "That's a good line," she said. "It's not a line," he said. He offered her his arm. They went downstairs. The ballroom was exactly what she had expected. Crystal chandeliers, a live orchestra, 200 people in formal wear moving through the space with the ease of people for whom this environment was simply Tuesday. Serena walked in on Dominic's arm and felt the room perform its assessment, the quick, involuntary calculation that happened when people tried to fit her into the expected template and found the fit imperfect. She felt the looks. She had been feeling them all her life. This time she looked back. Dominic introduced her to a state senator, 2 hedge fund managers, the deputy mayor, the president of a hospital board. Serena shook hands and made conversation and was warm and thoughtful and occasionally quietly funny in the way that catches people off guard and makes them lean forward. The senator's wife asked what she did. "I'm studying English literature at BU, Serena said, "and I work the front desk at the Harbor Regency." The senator's wife blinked, recalibrated, smiled with the slight tightness of someone encountering something they did not know how to file. "How refreshing," she said. Serena smiled back. "Isn't it?" Dominic, standing beside her with a glass of whiskey, took a slow sip to conceal his expression. Across the room, Raymond Voss watched. He had arrived at the gala as he arrived everywhere quietly without announcement, positioned to observe. He had spent 4 months watching Dominic Vero and waiting for the right pressure point. He had sent Aldridge to the hotel. He had waited for the fallout. The fallout had not come. Now he stood at the edge of the ballroom and watched Dominic and the woman move through the room together. And he did what he had always done. He made a calculation. He watched the way Dominic stood beside her. Not in front of her, beside her. The small, continuous adjustments of a man whose attention was always slightly turned toward one person in the room, regardless of who else was speaking to him. He watched the way she moved through his world without performing it, without trying to look like she belonged. She simply did. Voss had built his career on identifying leverage, on finding the thing a man could not afford to lose and applying pressure to it until the man made a mistake. He looked at Dominic Vero, looking at Serena Calloway, and he understood something that changed his calculation entirely. This was not leverage. A man with leverage could be threatened. A man with leverage would protect the thing he valued by making concessions, by retreating, by finding a way to manage the risk. Dominic Vero, watching that woman cross a ballroom in a dark green dress, was not a man who would manage the risk. He was a man who would burn everything down to remove it. Voss set his glass on a passing tray. He left the gala early. Some calculations, once completed, required no further action. They danced late in the evening when the orchestra shifted into something slower. Dominic led her onto the floor. They were not perfectly in time with the music. She was slightly behind the beat. He was slightly ahead. It should have been awkward. Instead, it felt intentional, as though the rhythm they were following was not the orchestra's, but their own, something built quietly over 8 months in a kitchen, above a harbor, in the backseat of a car, crossing a bridge in the rain, in the accumulated evenings of two people learning to exist in each other's orbit without pretending the gravity was not real. She rested her cheek against his chest. His arms tightened around her not possessively, but with the steady certainty of a man who had found something he had not known he was looking for and was quietly, completely unwilling to lose it. "Dominic," she said. "Yeah." She was quiet for a moment. The music moved around them. "I think I love you," she said, into his chest, quietly, almost hoping the orchestra would absorb it. His arms tightened. "I know," he said. She looked up at him. "That's arrogant. It's observational. And do you—" He stopped dancing, in the middle of the floor with the orchestra playing and the chandeliers raining light down on them, and 200 people occupying the edges of the room. Dominic Vero stopped moving. He lifted her chin with one finger. She looked up at him and held her breath. "I have run an empire," he said. His voice was low and completely steady, and it was the truest thing she had ever heard him say. "I have survived things that would have broken most people. I have sat across from men who wanted me dead, and I did not flinch." He paused. "But when you smile at me, I forget how to breathe." Another pause. "I was not prepared for that. I did not account for it. And I am not willing to account for a life in which it stops." Her eyes filled. She did not wipe them. "Is that a yes?" she whispered. "That's a yes," he said. "That's an always." She kissed him on the dance floor in front of 200 people. In front of the senator and his wife, and the hedge fund managers, and the deputy mayor, and the orchestra, and every single person in that room who had looked at her when she walked in and tried to work out what a man like Dominic Vero was doing with a woman like her. She kissed him, and he kissed her back. And the answer to their question was this: he was not doing anything with her. He was choosing her fully, completely, without reservation, the way a man chooses the thing that has become, without his planning for it, the most essential fact of his life. And she was choosing him back. The year passed. The 1-year mark arrived on a Tuesday in October, the same month the story had begun. The same city, the same rain moving against the glass. There was no ceremony, no renegotiation, no conversation about exit conditions or the practical mechanics of a temporary arrangement reaching its scheduled end. The deadline came and went without acknowledgement, the way all the most important transitions pass. Not with a marker or an announcement, but with the quiet realization that you are already on the other side and have been for some time. Serena was home from her afternoon seminar when Dominic came in carrying a small box. Not a ring box. She already wore the plain platinum band from the courthouse ceremony on her left hand. This was something else. Flat, dark velvet. She set down her copy of Giovanni's Room and looked at him. "Sit down," he said. She sat. He placed the box on the counter between them. She opened it. Inside was a necklace, a thin gold chain with a small oval locket, simple and solid and made to last. She opened the locket. On the left side, a photograph. Marcus, young and grinning, taken years before the diagnosis, the Marcus she had grown up with, the one who called every Sunday and meant every word and had loved her in the uncomplicated, undemanding way that very few people ever manage. Her chest tightened immediately. On the right side, a small folded piece of paper tucked behind the glass. She unfolded it. 4 words in Dominic's handwriting, sharp and deliberate and certain. "You were never invisible." She held the locket in her palm and looked at the words and felt the full weight of them. Not as comfort, not as reassurance, but as a fact being stated plainly by someone who had looked at her clearly and completely and was simply reporting what he found. She looked up at him. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket. He took out a second piece of paper. She recognized it without having seen it before, not from familiarity, but from the quality of it, the age of it, the way it had been folded and refolded many times along the same creases, the way a person refolds something they have been carrying for a long time and taking out to read in private. He placed it on the counter. She unfolded it. The handwriting was Marcus's. She knew it immediately. She had been reading his handwriting since they were children, passing notes at family dinners, since the letters he sent from the hospital, in the months when speaking had become difficult and writing was the thing he had left. The note was short. "She thinks no one ever chose her first. Be the first one, Dom. Just be the first." She read it twice. She put it down flat on the counter and pressed her fingertips against it and sat very still. "He wrote this before he died," she said. The night before, Dominic said, "It was with the rent receipts in the envelope. You've been carrying it." Since October. A full year. He had carried these 8 words against his chest for a full year through every evening in the kitchen and every late drive across the harbor, and every moment when he could have said something and chose instead to simply show her. She looked at the paper, at the handwriting she had known all her life, at the 8 words her cousin had written for a man he trusted with the most important thing he had ever held. She thought about Dominic at the back of the church watching. She thought about the drive to Quincy the first week of careful distance, the tea at midnight, the dinner he cooked after Gloria left, the 7 minutes across the harbor when Aldridge had stood at her desk. She thought about the courthouse and 11 minutes in a forehead instead of a mouth, and the feeling of something opening inside her that had been closed for so long she had stopped noticing it was shut. She understood now that none of it had been obligation. All of it had been him reading 8 words in a parking lot in October, and deciding with the same quiet completeness with which he made every decision to honor them entirely. He always knew, she said. He knew you better than anyone, Dominic said. He just needed someone who would finally look. She stood from the stool. She crossed the 3 feet of kitchen between them and put her arms around him and held on, not the tentative way she had held things for most of her life, afraid of the breaking, but the full real way of a woman who had finally stopped treating her own need for connection as something to be apologized for. His arms came around her. His chin came to rest on the top of her head. They stood in the kitchen of the penthouse above Boston and did not speak. The rain moved against the glass. The harbor lights trembled on the water far below. Boston did what it always did in October. It went quiet and honest and a little dark the way cities do when the year turns toward its end and the performance of warmth gives way to something more true. After a long time, Serena lifted her head. She looked at the locket still open on the counter, at Marcus grinning in the photograph, at the 4 words in Dominic's handwriting, at Marcus's note beside it. She picked up the locket and held it against her palm. She thought about the plant on the Quincy windowsill, carried through 2 winters and 3 moves. She thought about the library book with the cracked spine. She thought about a bus stop in October and a man she had never met who said, "Marcus told me you'd say that." She thought about the courthouse in 11 minutes and the specific irreversible feeling of a door opening inside her that she had stopped believing was still there. She thought about what it meant to be seen, not noticed, not assessed, not evaluated against a template and found wanting or acceptable. Seen. The way Marcus had always seen her. The way Dominic had been seeing her, she understood now from the moment he watched her sit alone in the third pew and absorb a cruelty that was not new and not the last, and had decided quietly and permanently that this was not how her story was going to end. She clasped the locket around her neck. She turned back to him. He was looking at her the way he always looked at her when he thought she was not watching, with the full unguarded attention of a man who could not quite believe his own good fortune and had decided that the best response to that disbelief was to pay attention as carefully as possible for as long as possible and not waste a single moment of it. "Thank you," she said. Not for the locket, not for the note, not for any single thing. For showing up, for staying, for being the first person who had looked at her and chosen her not from pity, not from obligation, not from the mathematics of what she could offer in return, but simply because she was worth choosing. Because Marcus had been right. She had never been invisible. She had simply been waiting for the right pair of eyes. Dominic pulled her close again. His arms went around her shoulders. Her ear pressed against his chest, and she listened to his heartbeat steady, and even the rhythm of a man who had built his life on control and had surrendered it piece by piece and month by month to something he had not planned for and could not have defended against and did not for a single moment wish away. Outside, the rain moved across the harbor in slow diagonal lines. The city lights blurred and trembled on the water. Boston stretched out below them, wide and lit and indifferent, millions of lives intersecting and diverging in the great indiscriminate motion of a city that does not stop for anyone's particular story. But up here on the 38th floor, in a kitchen that had accumulated the smell of good meals and open books, in the specific warmth of 2 people who had learned each other's rhythms and found to their mutual astonishment that the rhythms fit up here, the story had arrived somewhere real. Not at an ending, at a beginning, the real one. The kind that starts not when 2 people meet, but when they finally stop pretending they are not afraid of what it means to stay. Somewhere in whatever quiet place the dead go to rest, Marcus Calloway smiled. He had always known. He had known Serena better than she knew herself, had known the precise shape of her loneliness, the depth of her capacity, the quality of the woman who had sat beside his hospital bed every Sunday and held his hand and never once made him feel like a problem to be managed. And he had known Dominic Vero, had known that beneath the discipline in the empire, in the accumulated weight of a life that required hardness, there was a man capable of the most important thing of looking at someone the world had overlooked and seeing clearly and without reservation exactly what was there. He had trusted them to each other. They had not let him down.